Good evening. I'd invite you to open your Bibles to John chapter 10. Don had asked me to say a few things about myself, which I'm thankful for because that's one of my favorite things to do. I'm excited to be with you guys. When I got to the hotel room yesterday and the welcome basket that was given to me, very kind of you guys, very warm welcome to this time that we're going to be spending together in the next couple days. What I want to do in this lesson tonight is frame what we're going to be doing over the next couple days. I had submitted to Don several different ideas of meetings that we could be doing for this weekend. And this is something that I've been doing in different places, more as workshops for college age and high school groups. But Don asked me to share these things with you guys as well, and I'll just let you know from the beginning of this that I grew up in a secular family. I didn't grow up in a Christian family. I became a Christian when I was 19, and when I became a Christian, my parents were printing out articles from atheist websites, trying to persuade me that the Bible wasn't reliable. We were watching video lecture series together that they made me watch on why the Gospels have contradictions in them and therefore they can't be trusted, that sort of thing. And so when I was a new Christian, I came from a more secular background and I didn't understand anything about the Bible. And I started trying to study with people in college, and I eventually met my wife and taught her about a year and a half after I became a Christian. Then Samantha and I moved to Nashville, where I trained with Barry Kircheville. I know that you guys had him for a gospel meeting not too long ago. Moved to San Diego, where there was a lot of people that are not Christians there, and they would say that they're not Christian. So I had a lot of Bible studies with people in the community, a lot of them being skeptics, and that's kind of my background, so I'm really comfortable with that. And then after 4 years of being in San Diego, California, we moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And my big concern about moving back to the South is that anybody that I have a Bible study with is already going to have strong preconceived ideas about God and the Bible because they've probably grown up going to some kind of church or something like that. So I started a meetup group and a group of, if you guys know what meetup is, so I started a meetup group specifically for atheists. And from those studies came these kinds of things that we're going to be sharing together in this weekend. And I don't think that you need to be a skeptic to benefit from the kinds of things we're going to be looking at. Just by show of hands, how many of you know somebody who's a skeptic of God or Christianity or the Bible? Probably all of us in one way or another know somebody who's maybe fallen away. And so maybe you've got some people that you want to try to influence. But it's not just about us getting equipped in these next couple days to try to influence those people. I also want us to be challenged ourselves and ask ourselves, how influenced have I been by secularism, by worldviews that don't fit with what the Bible teaches? And to frame what we're looking at, I want us to look at John chapter 10 and just notice a couple verses in verses 10 through 13. Look at John chapter 10, verses 10 through 13. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Now I think one of the things that Jesus is referring to here are the ungodly leaders that the nation of Israel has had. And he's talking about the hired hand, the thief kind of leader, as opposed to himself being the good shepherd. But I think we can observe from this that all of us are led and guided by something. And there's really only two options. You're either going to be guided by a good shepherd or a thief. What's life like being guided by a thief? Steal and kill and destroy. You ever seen that happen to somebody before? Or they started following after this ideology, or they started following after this famous YouTube guy, or this famous podcast, or something like that, and it's not godly wisdom, and you saw that joy was stripped from this person's life. You saw that they became so fixated on things that can tear away from them, and so now they're overcome with all kinds of anxieties that you never saw them have before. Are you in danger of that sort of thing? If you follow anything other than the Good Shepherd, your life is filled with things being stolen, killed, and destroyed from you. But the Good Shepherd, notice when Jesus is talking to these people, the way that he appeals to them is that I came to give life and give it abundantly. Can you imagine when he would say things like that? And we're going to be referencing other verses like this in the Gospel of John even tonight. But can you imagine him talking to people and reasoning with people where he would say something like, you all have deep needs that you were designed to have fulfilled only in me, but you're going after all these other things, and the reason why you feel like things are being stripped from you, and the reason why you don't have joy, the reason that you don't have any sense of hope, is because you're allowing the thief to lead you, and you think it's going to give you something, but it's never going to. And so I want you to notice at the beginning of this, that Jesus would appeal to people based on these deep needs that they have. Now, keep that in your mind. Because in our culture right now, there's a lot of people that are walking away from anything to do with the Bible in our culture. I want to show you some statistics that are true for the United States. It's not true for other countries. Christianity is growing in other parts of the world. So these statistics are just what's happening in the United States. And so October of 2019, Pew Research, they had an article that was titled this, that in the United States, decline of Christianity continues at rapid pace. And the article talked about different kinds of people that do not associate as being Christian, religiously unaffiliated people, made up of atheists, agnostics, people who are indifferent, that sort of thing. And in this article that they published, they noted how in 2009 it was 17% of the United States was religiously unaffiliated. And then in 2019, 10 years later, that number jumped up to 26%. Now, I'm not from this area. Do you guys even feel like a place like Houston is becoming less religious just by like nodding or shaking your head? Does it feel like it's becoming less religious? Maybe? Okay. I know that there's always going to be some degree of, like there's mega churches and all that sort of thing. But 1 in 4 people, at least nationally, you would meet would not be in any way any kind of Christian. So then, how about this? You go a couple years later, and Gallup poll found that for the first time, less than 50% of Americans belong to a church. And in the article, it said this: the decline in church membership is primarily a function of the increasing number of Americans who express no religious preference. And then most recently, Pew, September 2022, they did another thing, and the article's subtitle was this: if recent trends in religious switching continue, Christians could make up less than half of the U.S. population within a few decades. All right, so you look at all that. How many of you are scared? You guys feel scared? Like, oh, this is really scary. We're becoming less and less religious. It's not like those past times, and people can think about all those sorts of things, and there's always good things about one generation and bad things about another generation. If we keep talking about the good old days, Ecclesiastes says that there's probably some bad things about those days too, so we shouldn't be thinking about that kind of thing. But I do hear a lot of older people talking about how things are just not the way that they were before. So here's my question. Why is this happening? Why does this happen in our country? And maybe if you're in school, you know people that have walked away. Maybe if you're here and you've grown up coming to church, you're wondering if you're going to even keep doing this yourself anyways. What's the reason why this happens? Whenever I've done these studies with atheists, I'm just going to let you know right now that I've read from a lot of atheists, and I take quotes from their writings, and I use them for the discussions that I have with the skeptics. Because I'm reasoning with them from their Bible, from their canon, if you will. And here's one of the things that Richard Dawkins says is the reason why religion is on the decline. Outside Western Europe, where only a minority nowadays are religious, most people around the world still do believe in a god or gods, especially if they aren't well educated in science. Do you see any snootiness to that? So here's Richard Dawkins, and he says the reason why a lot of people are walking away from religion is because they've become educated. But in other places where you don't have people who are educated, well, that's why they still need to rely on their god or their gods, something like that. So here's how the modern skeptic would like to portray himself or herself. I'm the one who has been educated, I'm the one who knows better, and you religious people, you need God as some kind of an emotional crutch. You don't want to think about not being with grandma one day. You've got these emotional needs or something like that, but we are Spock. And we are able to reason rationally about everything. We've got no emotions about anything. And whenever I've studied with skeptics, I have found that they might want to present themselves that way. But behind their arguments that seem very intimidating are emotional reasons for unbelief. You'd be naive to think that there are only emotional reasons for belief. There are also emotional reasons to not believe in God. And so I want to give you some of these causes of skepticism. If you were going to diagnose skepticism, go, well, what are the causes of it? All of these ones that I'm going to bring up are emotional in nature. And so the first one is a desire to sin. I'm not saying that this applies to everybody who's a skeptic, but I'm saying it would be naive to think that no skeptic was driven towards their skepticism out of a desire to sin. And there's a lot of quotes that we could look at that would show that kind of idea, but there's a lot of folks that don't like to think about how if I'm going to live however I want to live, I don't want to imagine having to be judged or go to hell for that one day. So let's come up with these really fanciful arguments that make me feel legitimate in my unbelief. Aldous Huxley is an atheist, and here he gets really candid in a book that he wrote, where he says, for myself, the philosophy of meaninglessness, and what he means by meaninglessness is that I don't think there's any objective meaning in the world that has been given to us by God. So there's no God that's given this world any meaning. We can kind of do whatever we want to do. So he says that philosophy was essentially an instrument of liberation. The liberation we desired was simultaneously liberation from a certain political and economic system and liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. Here's what he's saying. I developed my philosophy and I scoured the websites and I went to Wikipedia and I did the YouTube stuff and I found all these things that sound really sophisticated and I learned really big words that you have to learn to go to college, and these are the arguments that I use as to why I don't believe in God. But the base reason, at least for Aldous Huxley here, was I wanted to do whatever I wanted to do sexually. And as long as I was believing in this system of morality, I couldn't do what I wanted to do. Now, I want to show you another place in Scripture where you see this. Go to 2 Peter chapter 2. In 2 Peter chapter 2, if you've noticed the contrast between 1 and 2 Peter, in 1 Peter, the audience of 1 Peter is being beat up from people on the outside. He keeps talking about the suffering and how people are maligning them, people are speaking evil against them, all these sorts of things. So in 1 Peter, the persecution, the trials are coming from outside. In 2 Peter, the trials are coming from within the church because there's divisions, there's false teachers that have crept in. Look at what Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their sensuality, and because of them the way of truth will be blasphemed. All right, so here you've got people that they're not abandoning religion, but they're being attracted to false teaching. So they're becoming skeptical of what the truth is. What's the motivator for these people to listen to these false teachers? Did you catch it in verse 2? That many people will follow their sensuality. So you got a teacher that comes up and says, oh yeah, you can go ahead and live this way or that way, and they'll appeal to the things that you emotionally want to be doing, and you can get all kinds of people following you in that regard. Go over to chapter 3, though, and look at verses 3 and 4. Knowing this, first of all, that scoffers will come in the last days with scoffing, following their own sinful desires. All right, before I read verse 4, you notice that these people are scoffing. You ever been scoffed at? Oh, you believe that 8 people got onto a boat. You believe this about the age of the earth. You believe this about a book that was written 2,000 years ago. You guys might as well be still hitting rocks together to heat your food. Scoffing. Well, what's the motivation for the scoffing in verse 3? Following their own sinful desires again, but look at verse 4 and look at the argument that they're coming with. They will say, so here's the argument of the scoffers. Where is the promise of His coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation. Notice how sophisticated this argument is. You guys think that there's going to be a future judgment one day? Well, everything's been continuing as it has been before. You think that one day something's going to interject into world history and judge everybody? I'll never forget the time where this clicked with me. When Samantha and I were in Nashville, I was training there with Barry, and we did a vacation up to Minnesota before I was going to get ready to move to California. And so we had a 3-week vacation up there. It was a way of finishing the training program, all that sort of thing. And when I was there was a kid that had been converted at the church up at Northwest. And he wanted to get together with me while I was in town. And he came to me and he said, so I've got all kinds of questions about why trust the Bible. And I'm not even sure if God exists anymore and this sort of thing. And it just seemed like there was something else going on with him. And it wasn't just all intellect. And so I said to him, I'm fine talking about those questions, but I have a question for you, and please be honest with this. Is there something that the Bible teaches that is restricting you, that you don't want to do? Or is it telling you to proactively do something that you don't feel like doing? Guess where the real conversation was? Do you think it was in the, can we really trust the Bible and all, and there's legitimate times to talk about that? Or do you suppose that the more legitimate thing that was really the heart of what was going on was, actually there's some moral things that the Bible teaches, and I was coming up with all those other arguments to make it feel like it's okay that I go ahead and do these things I want to do. Now be honest with yourself. There's a guy that I know just a couple weeks ago. Just found out he's been cheating on his wife for 4 years. And for a couple of years now, he's been doubting the reliability of Scriptures, still coming to church and all that sort of thing. What started first? Was it the sin and then these new ideas, or was it the new ideas and then the sin? Sometimes you can't even tell, but oftentimes you start doing something that's immoral and you want to start thinking in some way or another. That's more emotional. That's not being Spock. So that's the first emotional reason for unbelief. Here's a second emotional reason for unbelief, is a bad religious experience. So whenever I get these groups of skeptics to come and study with me, we sit around this table at a coffee shop or whatever. And my first question is always, tell me your name and what you identify as. Not the gender thing, but what do you identify as far as your worldview? So I say, I'm Eric, I'm a Christian, and then we got somebody who's a secular humanist, we got an atheist, we got these different people, and we go around. So that's the first question. And the first question is always very emotionally cool, like everybody's cool. And then the second question that I ask is, tell me about your religious experience growing up. And that's where the emotions start to come out. I had a mom and dad that dragged me to church, and they were always fighting with each other, and they were always shoving scriptures down my throat, but they obviously weren't living it out. Or I grew up at a church where the only kinds of preaching we ever heard was why everybody else was wrong, but I was never challenged myself morally, and I don't like being in that kind of environment. And I saw all these hypocrites growing up, and I saw people that were members in good standing that were never disciplined for the immorality that they were living in, where other people who were not favored by the leadership were the ones that were shoved off to the side. People see these kinds of things. And to try to overcome the bad taste that they have in their mouth. Now, is that more because of enlightened thinking that they would walk away from Christianity, or is that more because of an emotional reaction to what they experienced? You ever noticed the theme in the Gospels of the crowds? Like the Gospel of Mark brings up the theme of the crowds, where you got the paralyzed dude in chapter 2, and the 4 guys carry their paralyzed friend to the house, and the crowd is in the way. Do you remember what they have to do? They climb up to the roof and actually tear a hole in the roof. Can you imagine being Jesus, and you're teaching in the house, and then some rays of sun come into the roof, and then there's clumps of dirt falling down, and then suddenly it gets big enough, and this guy gets dropped down. What did those friends have to do for the paralyzed guy? They had to overcome the crowds. Do you remember in the story of Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19? He was such a wee man that he had to climb up the tree. And remember when Jesus says, I'm coming to your house today? Do you remember what the crowd said about Zacchaeus? Disgusting tax collector kind of guy. Jesus, why would you hang out with him? And oftentimes I've thought the crowd saying that to Jesus, but who else is in the presence of all of these people being disgusted with this guy vocally? Zacchaeus is there. And he's looking at the crowd of people that have been following Jesus, and you know what Zacchaeus doesn't do? He doesn't go, well, Jesus, I don't want you in my house if these are the people following you who think I'm a disgusting person. No, what true faith does is it looks past the crowd. Now, I don't know if you've struggled with this. Maybe you've been burnt and fried by religious hypocrites. It's never a reason to walk away from God. In fact, you know what you can tell somebody who's struggling with that sort of thing? That Jesus was crucified by religious hypocrites. And if anybody can understand what you're going through, it would be Jesus. So don't let his people that have misrepresented him cause you to walk away. That's an emotional reaction. All right, so you see that one. But here's the third emotional cause for skepticism, and that's social pressure. Can you imagine in the 1500s walking around the streets going, I'm an atheist, agnostic maybe, indifferent for sure maybe. I don't know why I said maybe so many times. Can you imagine in the 1500s saying, you know, I just don't believe that there's a God? Everybody is going to look at you like you're crazy. There was more social pressure in that time period to believe in God. There's more social pressure now to not believe in God. And you can think about the social pressure coming from 3 things that all start with the letter P, your peers. I remember when I was in 8th grade, back when I was not a Christian, not concerned with serving God, I had some friends. They were all brothers, but they all got along really well with each other. I'd go to their house a lot. Their mom worked with computers, so their living room had no TV in it. It just had, everybody had their own computer station, and everybody was just on their computer all day. But one of them, so we would go from one computer when somebody had something funny on that to another one. And so one of the kids pulled up this chart that showed that the more educated you are, the less likely you were to believe in God or the Bible. And we all laughed at that and gone, that's right, those dumb people, or those are the ones that don't believe in God. Why is that the case, that the more educated people are, the less likely they are to believe in God? Would you like to be the person in your college setting where maybe you're getting a biology degree, and it's just everybody just believes so many things that are counter to what the Bible says? Do you really want to be the one person that goes, actually, I think this, and actually, I believe in the Bible, and everybody's going to pat you on the back and think you're great, right? I think one of the big reasons why more educated people are less likely to believe is just because they cave to the pressure. So pressure can come from that. Pressure can also come from parents in certain situations. What about professors? I don't think I need to say a whole lot about that. I had a lot of experiences like that growing up or going to college as well. But you see those 3 things. And because we are concerned about pleasing other people, the emotional reaction to being rejected is, oh, well, I'll believe in these sophisticated sounding arguments so that I'll flow with everybody. Do you see how these 3 reasons, desire to sin, bad religious experience, social pressure, none of these are from enlightened, deep, rational thinking? And pretty much all of the skeptics I've studied with, the root cause of their unbelief comes from one of these things. So, here's then what we're going to be doing for the rest of this weekend. There are 2 approaches that you could take to studying with people that are skeptics. And there's both approaches, I think, have their use, but I would suspect that most of us are familiar with the first approach, which I'm calling using objective evidences. These are when people will ask questions like, does God exist? How do we know that the Bible is reliable? Why does God allow evil and suffering? Where's the evidence for the Red Sea crossing and the Exodus? All those kinds of things. And so we can engage those kinds of conversations. One of the things that I like to do when I have studied with people that have got some questions like that is I like bringing up arguments from archaeology. Here's what I'm going to give you two really brief examples of what I mean by objective evidences, because then we're going to move towards another approach that we will be focusing on for the rest of the weekend. But say you got somebody that says, I'm not sure that I believe in the Bible, and how can I be sure that these events really happened? There's a lot of events that people have said didn't happen that archaeology then came along and found evidence for, and then people stopped making that argument that that event didn't happen. So one person had said that David is no more a historical figure than King David. Than King Arthur. David is mentioned a bunch of times in the Bible, and before 1993, there was no archaeological evidence that he actually existed. But there was this obelisk that was found, here's a picture of it, in 1993, and it was written by Hazael, king of Syria. And in this obelisk it says, I slew mighty kings who harnessed thousands of chariots and thousands of horsemen. I killed the king of the house of David. Now these events took place much later after David's life. But this is an obelisk that was found in 1993, that once this was found, people said, well, David was actually a real person. And so let's stop trying to say that he was just a mythical figure, killing Goliath and all that sort of thing. Maybe he at least actually existed. So you see, okay, that's powerful, that's helpful. When I was in college, this is something that I put on my dorm room door. People will ask the question, well, how do we know that God exists? And this is something that I recently did with an atheist I'm studying with as well right now. All right, so you start out with this. The universe. There's two options. We start with this question. The universe, does it exist or not exist? Everybody, unless you're a solipsist, who thinks that you're in a dream, I've never met a real solipsist yet, actually. But most people will say that the universe exists. Okay, so it exists. So did it have no beginning or did it have a beginning? And most people will say, well, yeah, it had a beginning at some point. Even atheistic scientists will say that the cosmos is expanding and whatever other things. And so the beginning was either caused by nothing or it was caused by something. So what do you think? Do you think nothing caused it or do you think something caused it? And then they'll say that something caused it. And so either that something was a non-personal thing or was some kind of a personal thing. And so it was either a cosmic accident or there was some kind of personality that impacted it, which would then lead you to God. And so do you see that you can, if you want to show people reasons to believe the Bible and God, there's all kinds of reasons for that sort of thing. But here's the problem in our culture right now. Have you ever tried sharing things like this with people and it just, boom, right over their head, or they have no concern about it? Even though they say these are the things they're worried about. I'm not sure that God exists. And you show them arguments. Oh, interesting, okay. I thought that's what you wanted to know about. Yeah, but I still don't know. Have you noticed that a lot of people in our culture right now do not base their beliefs off of objective truth? For example, scientifically speaking, how many genders are there? There are only two. But then people want to come along and say that there's a lot more than that, and that's just one example. And there's other examples that you could point to in our society where people are not choosing what they believe based on objective reasons and data. In fact, in 2016, the Oxford English Dictionary Word of the Year, every year they have a word that kind of captures where society's at. In 2016, it was the word post-truth. Post-truth is that we live in a time where people do not determine their beliefs based on objective facts and data. That's what that word means. And so if you guys have taken apologetics classes, maybe you went to school, FC or something, you've read apologetics books, this is objective reasoning, but our culture today is not one that reasons objectively. So how do you share the gospel with people, and how do you help people comprehend the worldview of Christianity when these kinds of things are things that people are not concerned with. Maybe 10% of people right now, I don't know. I've studied with some people that still care about this kind of thing, and there's a time and place to pull this stuff up. But this gets us into the second approach, which is subjective evidences. Objective evidences, using things outside of yourself, archaeological evidence, objective arguments, that sort of thing. But this is what I like to call subjective evidences, where you look within and you help people realize that Christianity makes more emotional sense than secularism. The reason that I started in John chapter 10 was to show you that Jesus appealed to people in this kind of way. Do you want life? Do you want it abundantly? Or like what he says to the woman at the well in John chapter 4, verse 14, whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. So here's this woman who's shacking up with a sixth guy that she's been with or something like that, very immoral woman. She's got theological questions about the right place to worship, and one of the things that he brings up to her is, you've got deep needs. And here's 600 arguments on how the Bible's true and you need to follow the Bible. No, he says, you've got deep needs, and if you come to me, you'll never be thirsty again. In other words, he's saying, look within yourself. There are things that you know you're lacking. There's things that you know that you need, and you've been trying to have these things fulfilled in all of these secular kinds of ways, the things that the secular world would say, all the sex that you want, pursue all the wealth that you want, get all the education that you, all these things, and this woman has not been satisfied by these things. And so here's what we do. We ask the question, which worldview best fulfills your deepest needs? Okay, well, what are our deepest needs? Everybody needs to have meaning in life. If you don't have a sense of meaning in life, that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow night, you just can't live. Everybody needs to have a reason for morality. I think when we talk about that on Sunday morning, you can have skeptical people who do morally good things, but the question is, what is the reason you're concerned about doing those morally good things? That's what we're going to talk about on Sunday morning. And we also need to have a sense of identity. How do I understand who I am? How do I understand self-worth? Because psychology, a lot of people are interested in psychology classes and trying to understand who they are. This is a universal need to have a sense of understanding your personal identity. And then also, we all need to have some kind of sense of hope. Without hope, without having a clear way of looking at your future and how you die, you either just can't think deeply about it, or every time you think deeply about it, if you're a secular person, it drives you to despair. And we're going to talk about that on Sunday night. And so, here's what I do when I study with the skeptics. I say, and we expand these out. There's a couple other needs that we talk about that we're not having time to talk about this weekend. But what we do is we say, first part of the class, how does a secular person try to find meaning in life? Because secular people, non-religious people, have a way of trying to find meaning in life. How do they do that? And then what are the flaws with that? And then what is the contribution of Christianity? And we'll do that same thing with all of these different needs. And two controlling questions as we go through all of this is we're asking the question when it comes to every one of these needs, which worldview best fits how I seem to be designed? And which worldview best makes sense of the world around me? And I'll just give you one example for morality. We'll talk more about this Sunday morning. But let's say that you've got a secular person that doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe that there's any being that's told us what to do or what not to do, but yet that same person cares about equal human rights, human justice, all that sort of thing. Glad that they're concerned with people being treated fairly. That's great. But the question is, if you believe that we came from the strong eating the weak, how did that system suddenly create people who are really concerned about other people? It doesn't seem to fit from your worldview. Do you see the point? So which worldview makes better sense of the world that we live in? I like what C.S. Lewis says here. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist. A baby feels hunger, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, there is such a thing as water. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And if none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, it does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly desires were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. There's all kinds of people around us that are trying to find meaning and morality and hope and identity and all these kinds of things from sources that will not satisfy them. And so all around us, there are people that are not satisfied, and we have to try to help them think about those things. And by the way, you need to think about those things too. You might be a Christian here, you might have been coming here for a long time. Are you really finding your meaning in God? Or, functionally speaking, is it in something else? Is your sense of identity built on what God says about you? Or is it based on all of these achievements that you're trying to get in life? Your sense of hope, is it really built on what God wants you to have it built on? By the way, what I've found whenever I've studied with skeptics is that as we go through these different human needs and they start to realize that they start to think more deeply and they realize, I don't have all the things that I know I need. That's when you then start showing the objective arguments. Here's why we believe in God. Here's why we believe in the Scriptures. Here's the arguments from archaeology, because their heart wants to believe it now, and then they can sink their teeth into the objective arguments. But what I'm positing this weekend is that what we need to start in our culture right now is with the subjective stuff, and show people why they should want this to be true. And then you show the objective stuff. Recently, I talked with somebody who grew up in a Christian family. And his father was an elder at a church, and his son was struggling with his faith. And the father asked if I would reach out to his son. And I called the son, and we had a couple long conversations, and he is an atheist now. And I asked him to explain to me kind of what's been going on with him. And he said, I've been struggling with some questions. Like, why would God create the world but then know that evil was going to happen, that sort of thing. He said, I've been struggling. And so I said, okay, so you used that word struggling. You've been struggling. Can you explain to me what that struggle has looked like? Because, you're not the only person in 2,000 years that's wondered questions like this. So tell me, what has this wrestling and this struggling looked like in your life? He said, well, I talked to one guy at the church, and I asked him to give me some reasons for some of these things, and I wasn't really satisfied with his answers, and that's kind of all I've done. So I said back to him, you're not struggling then. You're not wrestling. Wrestling means that you're devouring books, and you're talking to multiple people, and you're writing things down as you're trying to figure out answers. If you're struggling, if you say you're struggling, then show that you're struggling by actually looking at the advice from other people, the writings of other people. And what I had to tell him is, I don't think you're really struggling. I think you're looking at these questions as excuses to watch porn and as excuses to pursue other things other than God, so you don't have to constantly feel guilty about these things. That's what I think is going on. You have more emotional reasons for your unbelief than the objectivity that you want to present yourself with. And so I tried to start reasoning with him that God has got emotional reasons to draw you back. If you're here tonight and you've not been following the Lord like you know you need to, ask yourself what really is behind that. Is what's really behind this that I just kind of want to do what I want to do, or I don't want to have to be the odd person in my peer group, or I've had some bad religious experiences and I need to learn to look past the crowd. Either way, know this, that if you walk away from Jesus, the only master you will have is one that steals and kills and destroys from you. If there's anybody here tonight that needs to get their life right with God, this is an opportunity to do that. I look forward to the next couple of days where we're going to start looking at some of these other needs and show how Jesus would appeal to people based on the things you know you need. There's only one place to get any of these things fulfilled.
I will praise you with all